Hi friends, welcome to my city stuga, my city cottage. Today at the cottage we're working on the Orage dress from Deer Doe patterns, which is now under closet core patterns. I'm working this beautiful blue velvet knit that I found at Joann Fabrics a while back. This pattern has 7 pieces to make the dress view. If you're making this at home, you'll need a fabric that can stretch in most all ways, and the construction is greatly helped by having a twin needle. But if you don't have a needle, you can just use a zigzag stitch on your machine. These first few steps were definitely the most difficult, but once you get beyond them, the dress comes together really quickly. So in this first step, what we're doing is taking the yoke binding and putting it with the yoke, right sides together, aligning the center fronts. You'll have to stretch out your yoke binding quite a bit. So I start by putting the ends together, and then slowly you'll see I start to stretch out that yoke binding, which does get very tight, and pinning it in the center to then start pinning it through the rest of the yoke itself. I felt I had cut this yoke binding piece pretty accurately, so I wasn't sure if it was my choice of fabric that made this more difficult, or if I needed to go back and cut out a new piece of yoke binding. But this is one of the parts where it is important to have fabric that stretches in pretty much all ways. There are no darts on this dress, so the front is going to form to your body, relying on the stretch of the fabric itself. Now that I have my center pinned, I'm going to pull one side taut and find the next center, and I will just repeat this process going across to get alignment. The directions say to use your machine's stretch stitch to stitch the binding to the yoke, and so that's what I'm starting out with here with just a single needle, and to demonstrate how you can do that without using a twin needle. Not all machines have the capability to have a twin needle. You need a second place to put a spool of thread, but this machine I'm working on did have the option of adding that second spool, so you will see me soon switch over to a twin needle. You'll see the twin needle stitch in a lot of knits that you buy from the store. It gives it a clean finish and is how a lot of manufacturers top stitch their knit pieces of clothing. I had never used one before this. Like I said, my machine doesn't have the capability, so I've only ever used zigzag stitch to make any of my knit clothing. I'm carefully stretching out the fabric here to make sure that it doesn't bunch up at one end or the other, and so this was quite a slow process for me. With that said, I'm just going to step back on the voiceover and let the sewing speak for itself, and I'll be back to walk through the next step. While we're waiting for the next step, I do want to talk about the studio that I found to work in. If you're in a city, it can be difficult to find all of the extra space that you need to do your projects, and so if possible, check out any sewing shops or quilt shops in your area that maybe have workshop space that they rent out. Some will even do it for free on certain days as part of a community service initiative. But this has been so helpful and a great way to just focus on your project without the distractions of being at home where there is laundry to do and chores to get done, maybe people or cats to pay attention to. Once your yoke binding is attached to the yoke, you want to fold it over to create a nice seam and then top stitch with your twin needle, or if you don't have that available, then your stretch stitch on your machine. So this could be a zigzag or maybe a special stitch that your machine has to work with knit fabrics. At this point, I had not switched over to a twin needle, so you can see what it looks like with a single needle and doing a zigzag stitch as my top stitch. It came out pretty decent, and with the thread matching, it's not as though you can really see the thread up close, especially within the kind of crushed velvet texture of the fabric itself. Let's move on to attaching the bodice yoke to the bodice itself. So I'm going to be using the same method, putting my ends together, pinning them, and then finding my center and working my way out on both sides. This binding piece came together so much better with my bodice, which makes me wonder if I just cut my yoke bodice binding wrong, or there was something else that I had done and it was more of a user error when I was putting together the yoke and the yoke binding. Following the same process as the yoke and the yoke binding, I am using a zigzag stitch with my fabric right sides together to attach, and then once I'm done, I will flip it over to then create a nice seam and then top stitch. Here's a bird's eye view of what it looks like to have two spools set up for the twin needle, and this is the point of where I do transition over to using the twin needle the rest of the project. The twin needle will create a really beautiful finish on this bodice and bodice binding. As you can see, I've already rolled it over and pinned it, and so this is just the top stitch of the bodice and the bodice binding. I'm just moving to another angle here to give a better view. And this is what it looks like. It reminds me of a gymnastics leotard for some reason. Like this would be the perfect fabric to turn into a bodysuit to wear to dance class. I'm now at step 1-4 where I'm pinning the wrong side of the yoke to the right side of the front bodice. I'm basting it together along the shoulders and the armholes. So this is where you can see in the video I'm working very closely at the armholes to pivot and create a nice stitching line of attachment. Any kind of off-kilter stitch would really show up and create a ripple or just a tightness that shouldn't be there. Now that I have the wrong side of the yoke together with the right side of the front bodice, I'm going to move on to pinning the front bodice to the back with the right sides together and stitching along the shoulders. So I'm using, again, my twin needle here, and then I'm going to press the seam allowances to the back. With the shoulders together, you are supposed to do the neckband next, but I actually went ahead and did the sleeve. So this is me attaching the sleeve to the bodice with the right sides together, and then aligning all of my pattern markings, and then stitching the sleeves together with my twin needle. Once the sleeves are attached to the bodice, you're going to pin the side of the sleeves and the bodice with right sides together. So stretch the sides of the back piece to match the notches, and if your fabric doesn't have any vertical stretch, you can use a gathering thread to gather that upper part of the front side slightly, just to make sure everything fits. And then once it's together, stitch each side using a serger or the stretch stitch, in my case this twin needle, and then press the seam allowances toward the back. I'm moving on to the neckline next with a mock neck, and the key is just to use a lot of pens and go very slowly and match all your markings. I'm now moving on to the other sleeve, attaching it to the bodice and matching my marking. Once both sleeves are attached to the bodice, this is what it looks like when they're all pinned together, right sides together. It's time to sew the sides together, starting at the end of the sleeve. So I'm bringing everything right sides together, sewing from one end, either from the bodice or from the edge of the sleeve, all the way through on both sides. And then I'll flip it inside out and I will have a full bodice. I'm going to speed up sewing the second side and sleeve together, and we'll get started on sewing the skirt together next. Okay, now to start, I'm pinning the front skirt to the back skirt with right sides together and matching the notches. I'm stitching again using my twin needle and pressing those seam allowances toward the back. And once I do have the skirt together, which you'll see kind of here in the next clip, that it's all pinned together and everything aligns and matches up, then I'm going to go ahead and sew that skirt together. It's such a lovely, voluminous skirt. I wasn't able to capture sewing the sides of the skirt together, so this is jumping to attaching the skirt to the bodice with right sides together, making sure I'm matching the side seams and aligning the center fronts and backs. With the skirt attached to the bodice, I'm going to move on to hemming the skirt. So I have folded over the hemline and brought it to the inside of the skirt, and now I'm using my twin needle to do one stitch across the whole hem and just finish it off with that nice dual thread look to the top. And so I'm just top stitching this together. After the skirt, you'll give the same treatment to your sleeves, and then you have a complete dress. All in all, this took me about 6 hours to make, from cutting out to finishing the seam, and I would recommend. I'm now ready to go live my best witchy life during the spooky season. Thanks for joining me today at City Stuga, and if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more sew-alongs, craft chats, and city living. Bye for now.